Salam and welcome back to the TMV podcast. As always, I'm your host Salim Qasim. I probably need to start by apologizing. When I started rehosting this, I said we'd try and get an episode out every 2 weeks. I acknowledge and apologize that it's been a little bit longer than 2 weeks since our last episode. If you're listening to this, by the way, months from the time of publishing, then this really won't make a difference. But if you're listening to it live and you've been waiting for the latest episode, I do sincerely apologize. I'm going to try my best to do one every 2 weeks, but if not once a month at least is the plan. So I apologize. Sorry. Secondly, I was also thinking about the format and structure of this and to kind of how we can counteract this issue. And we're thinking of recording a series of content. So like one series around a central theme. So it might be relationships and marriage and all of that kind of stuff, and we'll package it together. So what we'll do is we'd go away, we'd go offline for a few months, record all the episodes and get them out and make sure we can produce that series of content in like a timely manner. I think that might work better, but we'll see what happens. Finally, before we start and I introduce our guests, a shout out to our sponsor, Covered in Confidence. The link is in the description. We're offering a 10% discount on all of their products. Fantastic product range. So thank you again to Covered in Confidence for sponsoring this podcast. Now that we've got all the admin out of the way, I would like to introduce my guests today, Imranali and Tahira Mahdiyya. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
Thank you very much for joining me. So you guys run a website called livingthequran.co. Before we get into all of that, I would just like to say that booking this podcast in has been incredibly difficult. I've known Imranali for many years. And so I thought, one phone call, no problem. But the guy travels, I think, more than Mufti Menk at this point. So when we were first going to do this, you were like, "Oh, I'm going to India."
Yes. Yeah.
What was going on there?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for having us here. It's honestly a dream come true. I think
Me and Tahira
were listing our bucket list and thinking, okay, Australia. We've been Australia. We've been India now.
You've been
TMV.
We've been
need
everywhere.
to be on the vibe. So I think we've succeeded in life now. India was an interesting one. Obviously, our forefathers have come from India, and I was thinking I always want to go there. And then out of the blue, Mainstay Foundation contacted me and said, "We're doing a lot of work there. Why don't we go have a look and document what's happening?" And I had some sort of expectation, what you see in the news and stuff. But what I saw there was, it was life-changing. Yes, we see what's happening in the news and stuff, but when you're actually there on the ground, it really brings things to light and makes you look at things with a different perspective. You see things the way how people are living in small rooms smaller than this, 4 people in one house, and you see how people are going through health issues. There was this boy that I saw, 8-year-old boy, Hamza. He was born with kidney issues, and he's just 15 kilos. And now he's reached a stage where they're saying, okay, his kidneys are not functioning, he needs a transplant. Now, for him to have a transplant, he needs his creatinine levels need to be low, so that's a bit high, so they're working on that. Once that's done, now they need to find a match. I think they found a match or two, but now the parents can't afford it. Now imagine that we're young parents.
Yeah.
You do everything, you drop everything to make sure your child survives, right? And now you have everything in place, but you don't have the funds. How would that make you feel? And that just broke me. It broke me.
I think what was always really interesting, because I've been on obviously a few charity trips and things like that, is that you go to one household and you see their issue, and it's like the need is, for example, £1,000. And usually when you're with a group of people, they're like, okay, let's fund that. Yeah. You go to the next house, £1,500. You're like, oh no, we can also do it. And you realize that there's so much need, and everyone's like circumstance is so unique, and it is really difficult. But I think it's more about getting people to understand that this is how other people are living. These are the needs, and obviously charities are there to facilitate helping those communities. Not just individual case studies, but like communities at large. Exactly. So that was like a 4-day trip that you went on?
Yeah, it was a 4-day.
And then when we were looking to record again, after you came back, you were like, oh, but it has to be before my trip. So today you are flying out again.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you're both going, right, this
Yeah,
time?
we're both
So you're going for
we're both
Umrah.
going for Umrah, inshallah. Just
Nice.
to, we thought there'd be a lot of gossip happening in TMV, so we just thought, okay.
get it all out your system.
Oh, listen.
So I mean, thank you guys for making the time. I know it must be a
Of
stressful
course.
day. I don't like doing anything on the days that I'm traveling. But basically, the conversation we wanted to have, and obviously we're speaking just prior to Shahr Ramadan. I think as the month comes along, we start thinking about the Quran more. We start So we'll kind of get into all of that and how that came together. But I just wanted to know, maybe Tahira Mahdiyya, we'll start with you in terms of growing up, what your relationship was like with the Quran, how you were introduced to it, what that practice was like. I'm sure it's pretty similar because I think we all grew up in like a very similar context and time. But yeah, what was your relationship like with the Quran? How were you introduced to it, and how did that then kind of manifest in your life?
So I think the way that you explained that when Shahr Ramadan comes, you feel like you start strong, and then after a few days, like it kind of feels more like something that we should be doing rather than something you automatically reach for in terms of the Quran. That's so natural because that's how we all grew up pretty much. Like it was kind of, you were told it's that the Quran is something that we should ideally have a relationship with rather than something that we feel like innately we want to kind of reach out for. And that, I think that's the difference that we're trying to bring to the table. So that, because there are ways that we've experienced in our own lives as we've grown up now, where like literally I feel like I'm struggling with something and I'm like, let me reach for the Quran and see what Allah has to tell me in this moment. And I find that so beautiful. And especially if that's something that we can then pass on to, like our kids, like we said, we're young parents, then that would be very different from the way that we were raised in terms of it kind of being like more of a tick box.
And Imranali, your experience, vastly different growing up in Kenya.
Yes, a big difference. So I had I had kind of a negative experience with the Quran when you come to it, because we had teachers who believed in perfection, but they, for them, the end justified the means, so to speak. And for those who grew up in East Africa, I'm sure you'll resonate with me that our teachers would come with a cane. Whether it was to help them walk or to help them beat us up if we made a mistake, that only God knows their intention. But yeah, got a few bruises to show for that. So yeah, I think when you have that kind of approach with the Quran, where you're scared to make a mistake because you know you might get beaten up, it's almost you put a negative association with the Quran, and with that, then what happens is that you don't feel like approaching the Quran, or you don't love the Quran because you've always had that negative perception, and that's what's led me to have these conversations and for us to come up with these ideas to change the narrative when it comes to the
So I think my personal experience has always been that when we were growing up, we had like the kids Quran, which was like, small words here and there.
Yeah.
Once you get through that, you move on to the big Quran, which is the Quran.
Yeah.
And you get your way through that. You make your way through that. Once you finish reading it, we have like a nice ceremony at the mosque to congratulate the kid. But like, I think at that age, I probably, beyond the word Allah, for example, I couldn't tell you much of what the Quran was saying. It was just about very much reading. And even, I guess, when you started teaching Quran as well, that was what you were teaching. It was just like perfection of recitation.
Yeah.
And that's how we were passed down the Quran and taught it. So for you, what was the shift? Like you were teaching Quran regularly. I remember in a community setting, 1-to-1, all of that kind of stuff. I hope you didn't bring a cane with you to your classes. I'm assuming not. But what was the shift then to be like, okay, like how am I going to go deeper? How am I going to connect more with this book?
I think there was a gradual shift, but the biggest turning point, so to speak, was when we became parents, and we started seeing things through the lens of our children and saying, okay, how are we going to be able to give our kids the best upbringing? And it was all about, okay, building a Quranic environment, because the Quran is all about these lessons that we've heard. You know, all the snapshot verses that we always hear that we never usually think about. And then when we started looking into those and thinking, okay, this is the way to live, actually, and this is how we need to raise our kids and ourselves, that's when we started taking a much deeper and bigger interest in, okay, the Quran is a book of guidance. The Quran is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us so that we can live it. It's almost our book of, you know, when you get new equipment and instruction manual.
Exactly. Yeah.
So and when we started looking at it, we were thinking, okay, there's a lot here what we're doing all of these lives, all of our lives, and it was, it's really something that was a game changer for us when we started looking at it. And I think especially because of month Ramadan, the key message for us is that, okay, we've gone through our whole lives, 30 days of month Ramadan, I need to finish my whole Quran, the 30th juz, and if I don't, I feel something wrong has happened. That's a good thing, to be able to recite the Quran and wanting to recite the Quran, but don't make your be all and end all. Make this month Ramadan that bit special, where we can even take one verse, recite it, know how to recite it well, reflect on it, and take one thing that I can implement in my life and make myself that 1% better through that verse.
And so what's interesting as well is that it's like both of you are doing this together. Sometimes you'll see one person, like I host these podcasts, my wife is nowhere near these things, right? When we get involved in things, it's often like one person and the other person is supporting and helping and whatever. So I guess Tahira Mahdiyya, when you saw Imranali was teaching Quran, and like how did that conversation happen where you decided, because now you also work with families and deal with kind of the principles underlying this stuff, so that required a level of you to study and understand these principles to then be able to talk to other people and help families kind of cultivate that Quranic spirit.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, how did that conversation transpire between the two of you, where you said, actually, let's take this seriously and do this? Or was it just an organic process?
I think it was a process, definitely, because I think for Imranali, he's always been very inspired by the Quran from the time that we met. Whereas for me, it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah.
Where like I said, when I was growing up, it was more sort of like you said, you tick those boxes, right? Like you learn big Quran and then you learn memorize surahs and things like that. But when I saw that it was possible to actually fall in love with the Quran, then it's just very inspirational. And then once you start seeing those techniques kind of work for yourself, where you, like I said, like now I feel like picking up the Quran and reciting it, where I never felt that before when I was little as much. Then we decided, okay, fine, like let's share this with people together. And I think it works really well because working with a family together, so for example, I would know what would work with the women, I would know what would work when the kids are really little, and there's a lot of people who want their kids to improve, but they don't know where to start from. And because we've tried that stuff out with our kids at home, and we've seen what actually works and what doesn't, or if someone comes up with a challenge where they're like, my kid, I tried this with them and it didn't work, we would know, okay, yeah, we also tried that, it didn't work, it's okay, like there's other ways. So it really helps to be able to access all the different parts of the family.
And when we spoke a couple of days ago, you mentioned this like forming or creating a Quranic family.
Yeah.
That's a term I've not heard before. What does that mean to you?
So I think what it means for us is the ideal is to be able to figure out a way for us to be living the Quran, right? In an ideal world. So to be able to do that, it would be lovely to be able to send our kids off to Quran classes and for them to be able to connect, and for us not to have to do much as parents. But in a real world, it doesn't work, right? Kids will go off of what you show them, not what you say to them. So we've had like numerous times where people have come to me and been like, can you just do a Quran class with my kid? And and you can teach them the alif ba ta, and you can teach them perfect makhraj, but when you want them to really become like for Quran to be part of their heart and soul, it's got to be something that's done as a family.
Yeah.
That's what we've realized.
Yeah, it's very important, because this is something I came across the other day. There's research being done that kids do as they're shown as opposed to do as they're told. And this guy did this experiment, so we'll do it with you.
With me?
Yes.
All right.
So, tell me how many fingers on my hand?
2.
2, yeah? And how many fingers on my one hand?
5.
Okay, there we go. So you took a bit of time to think, but the first thing you saw was
10.
my action,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's the thing. We can tell them as much as possible, send them to as many Quran classes as possible, send them to as many lectures and majalis as possible. But if that environment is not there at home, there's only so much that they can do and that they can take in. You can take it as for example, if you want a room to smell nice, like a reed diffuser, that thing that's causing the scent to spread, that itself needs to have that scent. If that doesn't have that scent, then you can't cause the room to smell nice, right? So similarly, if we want that beautiful vision of our kids to have that relationship with the Quran, we ourselves as parents need to have that relationship with the Quran.
So interestingly, when you did this, when you spoke about like seeing versus hearing, when I take my son to football, he's like 2 years old. They do this thing where they have to touch their head, touch their shoulders, touch their knees, and then every week the coach will say, like for example, he'll say, "Touch your knees," and he touches his head, and all the kids touch their head, and I'm like, I'm trying to tell, and I'm telling my son, I'm like, listen, he's saying knees, like touch your knees, but all he's seeing is the guy touching his head, so he follows. So it's really interesting. Like you're right, 100%, and we know this obviously. Like instinctively, we know this. Where when you're telling your kids, for example, to tidy up or to clean up, or even like speak nicely to one another, if you see in yourself that you're not speaking good to your family, they're just mimicking what you do.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you have siblings, when you have 2 kids, you'll see, for example, the older child will mirror the way that you talk to them to the younger sibling, and that's really scary when that happens. Just those little things, you're like, oh my God, is that really is that really what I sound like? So then the experience for you guys with your kids, there's 2 things I'm trying to think. Maybe we talk about this first, right? Which is actually, it's very difficult for us as adults, where we're very set in our ways. We've got our busy lives. We're traveling every 3 seconds, right? To then adopt new practices and behaviors. It's like, for example, starting to run or go to the gym, or adopting any new practice, using Duolingo to learn a different language. Right, you start off strong. That first week, the notification pops up. You're like, yes, I'm going to do my 5 minutes of Duolingo. But then very quickly you slip back into your old habits. With something like this, it feels a bit deeper, because we're talking about the Holy Quran. We're talking about the book that is central to our faith. But I think if people made an honest assessment of themselves, beyond, as you said, like the marquee verses that we've all like heard so many times in khutbahs and in lectures that we just know them, there isn't really like a deep connection to the Quran. And we're expecting to cultivate that within our own children without having that within ourselves. So I guess it would be great to get an understanding as to like your own personal journeys and how that process started for you. Because like I said, it's one thing, and I think when we talk about some of the examples later on, it will become more apparent, but it's one thing to like read the Quran with a translation, which I think is like level 1, but then when you go deeper, it's like understanding the tafsir, and then the next step is actually embodying and practicing this stuff. And I think it even comes to things like Allah. Like when we talk about God and Allah, like we trust it, we believe in God, we trust in God, but then every month, for example, we're stressing about bills. We're stressing about this, we're stressing about that. And it's like, well, if you trust God, you know that He's got your back. You know that He's going to look after you. So do you really trust God? And likewise, so coming back to the Quran, what was that journey like for you guys? And how did you get started? And was it like, did you need to be really disciplined and set a time to be like, no, I'm going to learn something?
So I think the way you explain the whole question, even I felt like not having a relationship with the Quran, because it seems like so deep and so much effort.
It made it so difficult.
So many barriers to entry.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, we do that a lot.
Yeah.
We make things bigger than they actually are. And as a result, we feel overwhelmed before even we start, and we don't even start. So the key thing for us was, okay, remove all the barriers to entry and make it, Islam is a way of life. Make it a part of our life. Find those things that we constantly see and that we constantly do, and then link it to the Quran. That is the first step. And that way, what we're doing is now, just the way we'd have fun with toys and have fun with sports and think about things that we're already thinking about, and now taking that next step with the Quran, that all of a sudden becomes a much easier perspective and much less barriers to entry than what I thought it would be. So, for example, maybe perhaps we can split it then. For young kids, for example, have used toys or use stories or use different things. I've brought props to help you.
Bring out the props. That's all good. Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, as we all know, the first stage is
But sorry, before we talk about the kids, it's
ourselves.
Yourselves, because you can't start that process.
Yeah.
Like you said, right? You have to embody it before you can pass it on, or you have to like act it before your kids will mimic that. So I think maybe Tahira Mahdiyya can.
Maybe she'll do a better job.
I'm not letting you get away with just anything. Oh yeah, this is the props I brought. No,
I thought I'd take control of this podcast.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think it's a journey, but Imranali's right in that it's not as overwhelming as it seems. A lot of the times, the reason why having a relationship with God or having a relationship with the Quran, at least something that I found in my own life, a lot of the times why it seems so overwhelming is because we take it on ourselves to form with Him. So we're like, okay, where do I start? Which tafsir do I read? When am I going to find time? But it's kind of swinging it back to God and being like very sincere and humble and just being like, I have a busy life. I have XYZ going on in my life, but I want a relationship with you, and I want a relationship with your book. I don't know where to start. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I want it. And I feel like that wanting and that being completely honest with God, that this is where I am right now and this is where I want to be, and you're going to be the one who takes me there. Once you do that and you leave it to God, I've seen in my own life, we've seen in our own lives that like Allah just opens up doors. And the time comes, there's barakah within that time. You start. I think when you come to the Quran without feeling like you need to, in terms of like, I probably should be doing this, but more just, I want to see what you have to show me today. I want to see how I can become closer to Allah today. Then suddenly like an ayah that you would have normally read as like, just because you should be reading it, it opens up in like a really beautiful way, and it seems suddenly relevant in your own life. And it just takes one ayah like that for that relationship to like blossom and start. And then once you see that, oh, actually I myself, like a normal average person, can connect with the Quran myself, like I'm not faking it anymore, then it just opens up more and more doors. And it kind of like...
And to summarize that, we call it the Kinder Surprise Challenge with the Quran. I wanted to bring
you can bring your props.
I wanted to bring you on, but we didn't have enough time to buy you one. But anyways, it was a thought that counts.
Yeah,
the Kinder Surprise Challenge. What are they to the Kinder Egg? So you have the foil, to unwrap the foil. Then you have the chocolate, so you experience and enjoy the chocolate. Well, I know you're a special diet, aren't you? And then once you've enjoyed the chocolate, then you have the toy inside, right? And for some, that's the best part, because you get to build the toy, you get to experience it and all. So similarly, with the Quran, we all know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought it as a book of guidance, and it's what He uses to speak to us. And that's something that we need to probably understand and realize, that we feel Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is this intangible concept that sometimes I believe, sometimes I don't, sometimes I remember Him, sometimes I don't. But I don't know how to speak to Him. I don't know how He's going to speak to us. All I have to do is open the Quran. So what we tell people is just open the Quran randomly. It's not istikhara or nothing, but just open the Quran, recite a couple of verses that stand out to you. Now that's peeling the Kinder Egg, because for you to be able to get to the crux of it, you need to recite in Arabic, just get the feel of it. And then for you to be able to enjoy the flavor of it, the flavor of the chocolate, you need to understand what's being recited and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us. So that's when we look into the meaning of it. The real enjoyment is now experiencing the toy and really playing with it. So now that's when you think about the verses, you read up about it a bit more if you don't get it straight away, but you actually think about, okay, today I have this meeting, I have that stress, I have this thing to do, I have this flight to catch, whatever. How is this verse? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling me through these verses that will help me, guide me throughout the day? And you'll see then, as you think about it, you'll see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is holding your hand throughout the day. Because you've kept those verses with you, you've thought about them, and whenever you're going through your different things during the day, you're actually thinking about those verses. And you'll see how you stay with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides your thought process, guides you to make the right decisions throughout the day. And as you do it on a consistent basis, you'll see things opening up more and more and more. And then to just top it off, just journal it. It just changes things. And the best thing about that is no matter how busy you are, it just takes 10 minutes of your time, if that.
Very nice.
Yeah.
That answer was amazing, by the way, as well. I was going to say, please take note. Next time someone asks you that question, that's how you answer it. But no, it's beautiful, right? Like reframing it as it's something I've realized recently that we're always trying to do everything. And we think that we're driving it. And it's literally that in itself is like, shows that our thought process is devoid of Allah. Because exactly, the mindset is skewed because it's not us that does anything, right? Any good comes from Allah, right? So in this specific context, it's like, I want to get closer to Allah, I want to get closer to the Quran. Let Him handle the
how.
Yeah, the how, right? And you see it manifest, as you said, like in all those beautiful ways. That's really nice. And the Kinder surprise as well. I've heard you mention the Kinder surprise so many times, I never bothered to ask. I'm glad I waited.
Remember the hook points. That's
I told you. I just remember the.
Maybe that's a problem.
Yeah, the first 3 seconds of your videos need to be stop being so like interesting. Because then I'm like, okay, yeah, then he's gonna make it, So, okay, I think that's really interesting in terms of how to start. Now, what I also wanted to spend some time on was actually for people that are parents that are watching this, to understand ways to be able to interact with their children and like the different kind of activities. So I think I realized at some point in the last year, I spoke to a few different people, someone who runs, for example, a Montessori that you've been to, and you've spoken to the kids, and then I've seen videos of you doing that as well. And I never thought I would see children that young, like so enthusiastically engaged with surahs in the Quran, and it's amazing. Like those the concepts, and like you're teaching pronunciation, you're teaching the meaning, you're teaching like the essence of these surahs and these verses. That's that it took us years to learn because there was no like interaction, no engagement, and I think tailoring the message as well for different ages is really interesting and important. So I kind of created 3 categories of children. So I was thinking 0 to 5. So both of my kids, my daughter I think is 5.
You think?
My daughter I know is 5. I think. Yeah, just about. And my son is turning 3. Also, we'll check the numbers later. But so both my kids are under 5. And again, we send them to Arabic school and the madrasa and stuff like that. So they're learning surahs. They're learning about. I remember one time, my daughter fell over, and she started saying "Ya Shafi, Ya Shafi," and like me and my wife looked at each other and we were like, "Did you teach her that?" And I was like, "No, did you teach her that?" So it's really nice because they do learn and engage with these things. But what are some of the techniques? Like you mentioned Quranophonics, I think. Yeah. So can you give some practical examples of how you're able to talk to younger children and just start that kind of, or cultivate that journey?
So yeah, it's interesting you say Quranophonics, and this is a very important point, is that there's a lot that's out there that you can just learn and incorporate. And a lot of these techniques, I'm not an official like teacher or anything. I've just researched and searched on YouTube or on Instagram, and you get all of these things. So there was this one that I came across, Quranophonics, and the whole idea was to create stories about the letter themselves and link it to how to pronounce it. So what this does is just makes it a lot more memorable, makes it fun, but also it makes the whole pronunciation, where exactly what the letter is pronounced comes out from, a lot more easier. So for example, the letter kha. So this is where I can take out my props.
Please.
Okay, so firstly, flashcards are a really, really important part of my my thing. So just showing them the letters, how they look, and getting them to touch and feel it just makes it a lot more better and a lot more tangible. You know, like how I feel like a magician, you know, with your deck of cards. So the letter kha, for example, the story behind this is the letter kha is a very sick letter, and feeling very cold, so wears a hat on top, and that signifies the dot on top. The letter kha coughs a lot, but coughs in a very different, funny way. It coughs like this, kha, kha, kha. And also you see all the kids, they try copying it, they have fun with it, but this instantly, one of the most difficult letters to pronounce, they pronounce it perfectly the first time. And it's all through storytelling. Or for example, you can use different things.
Can I just tell you, by the way, so after we spoke and you mentioned this example a few
Yeah.
days ago, I tried this on my daughter, instantly got it right.
Straight away, isn't it?
So she's always struggled with kha because it's quite a difficult letter.
Yeah.
But I just told her the story about some sick letter. I forgot the hat and all of that stuff. But and instantly, and I was like, this is amazing. So it's a really this one I can vouch for. This is amazing. this technique is solid.
It works. Or for example, the letter dhal. You know, some of those letters that you get stuck between the letter dhal and the letter za. For example,
I feel like you should have prepped the order of these cards a bit better before coming here.
It's all organic. We wanted the organic, no?
You said this was your dream to come on the podcast. Like, you can't even find it. There you go.
The letter
I'm just
dhal.
killing time for you.
So the letter dhal. So a lot of people struggle with this between the letter dhal and za. So a good way is introducing Faisal the frog. So you say Faisal the frog, how does it eat insects? So by stretching its tongue out, right? So similarly with the letter dhal, we have to stick our tongue out and then pronounce the letter dha. So then we get them to stick their tongue out and catch that insect. Dha. And that's way they're sticking their tongue out, catching that insect, and then remembering Faisal the frog with the letter dha. Some people like to have those English similarities, but not everything is similar. But then, so for example, if I were to explain the letter dhal to an older person, I would say, how do you say the book? You wouldn't say the book, you'd say the book. So those kind of similarities. There are quite a few different things. So that's in terms of the letters. Then when it comes to, for example...
that is like a magician's bag, by the way.
It is.
There's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there. I think we don't have time to go through.
No, that's very cool. Just Tahira, anything to add in terms of like this age bracket particularly?
I think when it comes to kids, it's a bit different from the outlook that we have for ourselves in terms of, or maybe it's similar, I don't know, you can tell me, but I feel like when it comes to our kids, we need like a spiritual plan for them. So the same way that you would have a sort of academic plan for them. So by the age of, you'd be like, you know, by the age of 3, 4, 5, I'd want them to be in this school. By the age of 7, 8, I'd want them to know this much, want them to be able to read this kind of book or whatever. Aiming for this kind of high school, this kind of university. I feel like as soon as they're born, in our heads, we feel like this responsibility to get them to a certain academic standpoint by a certain age. And that's beautiful and that's brilliant. But we don't often have the same thing spiritually for them. And it's very possible. So I feel like it requires a little bit of planning. Like taking the time to be like, actually, by the time my kid is 4 or 5, and we see this really well in the Ahlus Sunnah, actually, they have a lot of kids by the age of 7, 8 who have reached levels that we would think is impossible in terms of their level of Quran, memorization, recitation, everything, even understanding. So I think it requires a little bit of planning for them. That's all that I wanted to add.
There was also, I've written down here the bouncy ball surah. I have no clue what that means.
So the bouncy ball surah is the concept of qalqala, where you bounce on the letters. So one of the best surahs to practice that is with Surah Al-Ikhlas. But I thought, okay, so the qalqala letters it's too early to teach the qalqala letters to 0 to 5-year-old kids. But we also want to teach them Surah Al-Ikhlas. But sometimes I feel that they learn the surah in a particular way, and then when they grow older, when it's time to learn qalqala, then you have to relearn it almost. So I was thinking, okay, how can we combine the two, where we don't have to go into the details of qalqala, but at the same time teach them correctly the first way. So just bouncy ball, just the way you have a bouncy ball, you bounce on the last letter of the of Surah Al-Ikhlas. So for example, you go, then we just get them to carry an imaginary ball, or if we're generous, then we get them a bouncy ball, and then tell them, okay, bounce with me on the last letter. Maybe you can bounce with me. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul huwallahu ahad. So that dal you bounce. Allahu samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And therefore, just with that bouncy ball effect, they don't need a bouncy ball, but just with that effect, it's much easier for them to memorize the surah, but at the same time they're memorizing it correctly.
Nice. Yeah. So that's really cool.
I think another thing I think this is something that us as parents always have this tussle with, is the respect of the Quran as well. So when we're opening the Quran, we're reciting from the Quran physically, one thing that it makes all our heart stops is when our child comes and touches the Quran and almost rips the page out and all of those kind of things. And it's important, yes, the Quran is something that needs to be respected, but it's important not to give them that feeling that the Quran is not for them. Because if you look at it from the child's perspective, we're having the Quran, or you see them reach out for the Quran, the child is thinking, okay, I see my parents reciting from the Quran, must be something important, let me see what it's about. The minute I reach for the Quran, it's been taken out from my hands. Why? Maybe it's not for me, right? So there are ways around that. So over there we have a plastic Quran, that's for kids. That's for kids. So two things. One is you can touch it without wudu. Second thing is you can't rip it. So they can feel and experience the Quran with you, but at the same time you don't have that problem of disrespect to the Quran or tearing the Quran. Or the other thing to make it fun and exciting is, on that stand is not a regular stand. It's a lime green butterfly stand. And a lot of times, sometimes we'll feel, oh, my kid doesn't want to recite Quran, or my kid doesn't have the same feeling about the Quran than their other books. Just make it fun and personalized for them. And then all of a sudden, they want to recite Quran because it's on their lime green butterfly stand. And you just do these different kind of things to make it easier for you and make it more fun for them.
And we've seen it work. Like, we've come downstairs in the morning sometimes, and they've literally taken out their books, the Quran book stand. They're reading their Quran by themselves. It was just making it up. They don't know what they're reciting as such, especially when they were little. But the fact that you come down in the morning and you see your kid with their Quran open,
that's crazy.
It's gold. Like, it's just. But the thing is, again, like we said with the planning thing, like plastic Quran is not just going to show up in your house, right? So you've got these are all great ideas. The resources are all there. Like, it's not like we've created that many. They've all been out there. It's just taking the time to sit down together and be like, as a family, these are 2 or 3 things we now want to keep in our house. And once they're there, the kids are so pure, they'll just start playing with it and interacting with it.
So there's also, before we move on to the next age bracket, there's that book, Angel, Asma and Husna, just behind you. So this is something that we've got at home as well. And my child, my daughter, she loves them. And what was crazy was that from I think a year, she was 4, and she knew these verses. And I was in one swoop, and then at the back there's activities as well. And so one of them was about Allah being the creator. I can't remember the verse, so clearly,
it didn't work on
you. It didn't work on me, like always.
It's the hook point that works.
So I know Angel, Asma and Husna, but so with that one, it was about basically it was asking the question of who created something. Was it Allah or was it human beings? So there was a ship, there was a flower, there was water, all of these things. And what I found amazing was that very quickly my daughter could grasp the concept, and was even then I had the conversation about it. I'm like, okay, so if human beings made the ship, what does that mean about Allah? She's like, no, but Allah made the human beings who made the ship, so He gave us the power to do this. So within like the first time of reading it, she understood the difference between man-made things versus things that were natural, but also that Allah kind of governs and is in charge of everything. And also the other day, you know, when we were talking about this, we also had like a brief conversation about like death, for example, and how we talk to our kids, especially at that age. Because I talk to my kids like I talk to you guys. They don't understand much because I'm, you know, I just go on like I'm on a podcast basically. But no, like I think like with everything, I don't like to sugarcoat things from them. Like I just tell them what's going on. If someone's died, someone's died. If we're going to a funeral, we're going to a funeral. You know, my daughter has been to the graveyard sort of many times. It sounds really morbid, but like she has a good time there, and she knows that we're praying for the people that have passed away.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I grew up as well, sometimes there was an element of like shielding us from the truth because our kids can't handle it. But what we were discussing the other day is that actually we should give kids more credit. They're a lot more intuitively smart when it comes to this stuff, right?
100%. Tahira Mahdiyya has a beautiful way of explaining that whole.
The death.
Yeah.
I think they're a lot more capable of understanding so much more than we give them credit for, and because they're so pure, the kids they automatically see it in the most beautiful, truthful way, the reality of it. In some ways, sometimes they teach us, right? So, for example, with death, the way that we talk about it with our kids is going to play with Allah. So since they've been born, we've had people in the family who have passed away, close family as well. So they've been exposed to it, and they literally see it as something that they can't wait to go play with Allah one day. We're all going there. So even it makes everything easier. So whenever you're talking about anything, so for example, we're going to Umrah, we were talking about going to visit the Prophet, and he was like, Muhammad Zaki, my 3-year-old, was telling us that it's okay that the Prophet's died because he's going to play with Allah, and Bibi Fatima's with him as well, so it's okay, like they're playing together. And it's so beautiful to see how they see things. And I think you're right, we didn't get taught about a lot of these concepts until we were old enough to understand them. But in reality, like these kids, these 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds even, they can understand Allah in a much more pure, authentic way if we let them. So it's just, and we don't have to. I think another thing that has come up in conversations with people is that sometimes we feel like we ourselves need to hit a certain level ourselves of knowledge or understanding of Allah or the Quran before we can translate that to somebody else. And that's why we want to send them to classes rather than taking it on ourselves. But when there's something really important that you want to get through to your kid, you want to be the one doing it.
Even for this book, for example, وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, there's so many concepts that we don't know that we can learn from these books. They're not necessarily for kids. So there's no beautiful way than learning it together with your kids by reading it together and then discussing it as well.
So moving on to the kind of 6 to 11-year-old bracket, that's more when you start instilling principles in your children. What kind of stuff do you do with kids of that age? I'm hoping you got another bag of props for that.
There's plenty.
Just look around.
Quite a lot,
We've got props everywhere.
We're going to have an empty shelf by the end of this. So this is a very, very cool thing. So now this is kind of the age where you're starting to instill the akhlaq and trying to make sure that they're decent, half decent human beings. But there are different ways of going about it. So there's one way by constantly telling them off, okay, behave like this, sit in this way, make sure you talk in this way. Or you, again, mention stories, but link it with the Quran. The Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made hook points for us, so to speak, where it's so short verses, but they're easy to memorize, easy to think about, and also easy to implement. So, for example...
if you don't mind, maybe try and hold it up a little bit more just for the...
Sorry. I think, sorry for all the creases and stuff. I guess it's
this
a good sign.
It's a good sign,
It has been used. So, for example, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ أو وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. Speak kindly to people. Now, we all tell our kids, okay, speak softly, speak nicely, don't, I don't know, some kids maybe don't abuse others, stuff like that. So instead of constantly telling them, you get to sit down with them, you get to tell them a nice story, but you also tell them, you know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran? وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. And I also try and add actions to it. So وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. And you just get them to repeat that and memorize it. So then next time when they do something, we tell them, remember what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us? وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. And then they finish it. And that way, it's just doing the same thing. Remember we said earlier, it's all about doing the things that we normally do, but now just incorporate the Quran with it. And now these are easy things there that are just reminders, as opposed to us having volumes of the Quran there and trying to flick through, okay, where's that verse? It's just here. These are fun, quick ways on how to improve the akhlaq of ourselves and our kids as well. So
I remember there was one time period where we would just once a week pick one, and then we would focus on that one for the week, and we just keep repeating it. One disclaimer is that they will start to say it back to you. So وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. So just be aware that it is like a family process. But yeah, someone just literally phoned us last night, and they were telling us that they started saying one with their kids, and their kid is 3 years old, and she started picking it up and saying it back to them. So yeah,
that's good.
That's really nice.
It's a game changer. And then the other thing was memorization. So memorization is a huge thing. Never put a cap on your kids.
Yeah.
They're like sponges. We all know that. They can take in so much. And there are a few ways of going through the memorization journey. So naturally, we start off with the 30th juz, right? With the smaller surahs and then go bigger. And then there comes a time, like we've seen that we're at this stage where our kids, okay, they're tired of us pushing the whole memorization thing. So yeah, don't push it, but maybe approach it a different way. And so rather than getting them to sit down or just constantly listening and constantly asking them, you play different games. So one game that I play, and the kids in the Montessori, they always love this, and they say they always laugh at me because I recite it wrongly, so then they have to correct me. So you're getting to understand two things. One is how much they know of the surah, and two is whether they actually know it in its correct order. And that always helps. Or for example, there's this board game that we came across, the Surah Journey, and it's a board game, and essentially you roll the dice or whatever. It's not dice, it's cards, and then you move, and then whichever stop you go into. So let me link it to Monopoly. Let's say you're in Bond Street. The Bond Street version of this is Suratul Ma'un, for example. So whichever surah you stop on, you don't have to pay money for the hotel, but you have to recite that surah. So you recite it, you ask them to, so whoever's turn it is, they recite the surah. So that way, you're making it fun and engaging. They're able to practice their surahs. One thing that we realize is because we've memorized 10 surahs, the first few surahs we've forgotten about because now we're focusing on this, right? So it helps us loop back and practice those. So different ways, just makes it so different and fun and engaging for the kids and for us as a family as well.
And then with the older kids, 12 to let's say 16, because I think at that point in life, I mean, obviously my kids are still a long way from there, but I can vaguely remember being that age, a little bit, not that old, guys, please. It's getting awkward. But no, you know what I mean? Like you can remember some of the emotions and whatever else, and like at that point you're starting to become more rebellious and not wanting to listen to authority and your parents and your teachers, and you know you're starting to form like an identity for yourself. So how, like, what kind of examples do you have of kids that you've worked with within that age bracket, and how have you managed to create that bond and connection?
So I currently teach kids that age every Sunday, and
God help you.
It's actually, a lot of people have told me that, but it's the best, my best hour of on my Sunday, because what it is like people feel, okay, I go to madrasa, I must behave in a particular way, I must make sure I'm writing notes and stuff, but first we need to realize it's Sunday. We need to realize these kids are rebellious in their nature, but we need to get the message across either way, right? So how are we going to make it a fun, active, engaging way of them having conversations, but around the Quran? So I think we need to empower them more than talk down at them. So we need to identify what they're into, what they're going through, so that we can almost empathize with them, and then see what lessons we can take with the Quran and show them. I think the key thing is empowering them to be able to take this Quran and hold it close to them and love it and take it as a friend for them. So the other day, they all came together at once to madrasa, and I was thinking, oh, where have you guys come from? So we just had a sleepover at one of our friends, and we all got dropped off at the same time. So I asked them, what did they do? They said, oh, we recited Surah Yasin and we recited some surahs. I said, oh, what? What happened? I knew I was having an impact, but not that much of an impact. He said, no, we were forced to recite Surah Yasin. Okay, I said, that's fine. Then what did you do? They said, we watched a movie. So there are two ways of going about it. They're saying, oh, movie, okay, fine, good one. Or movie, how dare you? Or a third way is, okay, you watched a movie. What are the themes that were in the movie? Now, let's pick those themes and see what the Quran says about those themes. And then all of a sudden, it became something that they loved that experience of the movie, but they had separated it from religion. They thought, okay, that's separate to religion. Now I'm in madrasa, it's separate. Similarly, in our minds, we think, okay, Islam is separate to my day-to-day life. In fact, it should be a good synergy. And then what we did was we came up with those themes, and now we searched for it in the Quran. This is another beautiful resource that I came across, and it's just been a game changer for myself and for other people that I've spoken to. The website Quran.com. This website, it allows you to search for themes in the Quran in English. So for example, perseverance. I will come to that cricket example as well that I was telling you about. For example, gratefulness. You just type in gratefulness, or you type in perseverance in Quran.com, and it'll come up with a list of verses that have that concept in them.
The other example actually that you gave was about mountains.
Yes.
So like, let's say you're going for a family hike.
Yeah.
You can go there at the top. You can sit down when you're having a picnic, whatever. Search for mountains and see what the Quran says, and then as a family have a discussion and reflect. I thought that was really nice because, like you said, maybe the way I framed it way back when in this conversation was that like, it's a big mountain to climb, no pun intended. But actually, it's a lot easier today, and we have so many resources. I mean, like, the room is littered with like all these different resources that weren't available when we were growing up. So yeah, like it's definitely easier now than I guess it once was, right?
You can do anything. Even when we went to Toronto, we went skiing. And as a first-time skier, you fall down so many times. And finally, when I conquered a slope, I told her, we need to find a verse from the Quran. So then she was there.
I was literally taking my ski gloves off, trying to find,
hurry up, find this verse. It's like so cool. But we did it. We found a verse about perseverance. وَاصْبِرُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. We persevered until we conquered the slope. And it just has to be front of mind. You just have to think, okay. Initially, it's an effort because it's not something that we're used to.
Yeah.
But then slowly it just becomes a part of your life.
In terms of, you mentioned the cricket example.
Yeah.
You might as well give that then before.
So I was talking to this family. So one thing that we do as part of living the Quran is we speak to families, parents in particular, on how they can. So we speak to them about their day-to-day lives and how hectic their schedules are, and see how we can incorporate the Quran in those lives. And the kid was, I think, 14, 15. He was in the process of being selected for England. And we just got talking. I love cricket, and we just got talking. Okay, what's he doing? He wanted to become the next Ben Stokes, and how he practices his shots in the nets. And then I told him, do you know, would you believe me if I told you Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can show you how to become a perfect cricketer? He said, really? In the Quran, cricket? I said, okay, let's see. So I told him, what's the theme? What do we need to do to become a good cricketer? He said, okay, I need to constantly practice my shot in the net. And the nets. Okay, so should we say what? Repetition, maybe endurance, maybe perseverance. So we looked up those themes in the Quran, and there was this verse that came that was like brilliant. So it had all of these themes in. So, and the verse was, and persevere and endure and remain steadfast and remember Allah and He will make you successful. It was something along those lines. And we said, okay, in the nets, what do you have to do? You have to constantly keep on practicing and hitting your shots. So that's perseverance, right? So that you can improve your game. But as an athlete's career will go through ups and downs. You'll have your peaks and you'll have your moments of lows. And it's through the lows that you have to constantly endure those. You have to have grit so that you can become successful. So that's the endurance part. And then for you to be able to hit the perfect shot, you need to be steadfast. Your legs need to be straight. Your head needs to be straight so that you can watch the ball and hit the ball perfectly. So that's this remain steadfast part. And then I said, what do you think about this remembering Allah? How can you remember Allah while hitting a shot? He said, my dad always told me before I hit the shot, I should say Bismillah. So I said, okay, that's a perfect way. You remember Allah while hitting the shot, and then you become successful. And he said, and that was like you could see it open up his eyes, and it just opened up so many more possibilities for him. Now, all of a sudden, from something you've loved all your life, cricket, we've compartmentalized cricket. I can't be religious while playing cricket. Now, all of a sudden, we've removed that barrier. We've seen how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can hold our hands and make us a successful cricketer. And there we go. Created that synergy.
It's interesting that compartmentalization, I think, is really key to how a lot of people have been brought up, incorrectly, I believe. But like, we were taught Quran, and it's like, especially in Shahr Ramadan, you go to the mosque, you read Quran for like half an hour before iftar or whatever. Once you get through like all of that stuff, it just becomes like very formulaic. But there's as you're kind of pointing to, things don't bleed into one another. So we have our work, we have our home life, we have our Quran, we have this, we have that. But really, there should be an interconnectedness in our lives.
Yeah.
I wanted to, because when I hear you guys talking about all of this stuff, it's hugely kind of, I think, transformational in terms of how families can interact, how individuals can interact with the Quran. I wanted to ask a bit of a tough question, but do you think how we were brought up and taught the Quran, do you think it was flawed? I'm going to let your wife answer this one first. She usually does a much better job.
Go for it.
I think there's always room for improvement, right? There's a reason why we compartmentalize the Quran and we keep it as sort of, you get to mosque, you check when Quran is going to finish, that's probably when you should turn up.
Yeah, of course.
You're like, okay, no, like Quran is for the first 5 minutes, so we'll show up for majlis. There's a reason why that's happened, and that's why there's so much interest in talking about this stuff, because we want it to be different for our kids and for ourselves, to be honest. So I think there's definitely better ways to handle it. So for example, I was reading something just recently, and it was talking about, the characters in the Quran, the different stories.
Mm-hmm.
While we're reading them, putting ourselves in their shoes. So for example, and this is something.
You mean the stories of the prophets?
Any story, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So for example, the story of a prophet. So for example, the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. This is something we've even done with the kids, and it's worked really well as well. But even for ourselves. So you tell them the story, but you make it like super dramatic and exciting while you're telling them. So you tell them, for example, for Musa alayhi salam, so he's trying to escape from Fir'aun. So you set up the baddie in the situation, right? So he's trying to escape from Fir'aun, and he's running, and Fir'aun's chasing him. Fir'aun's got so many people, and they're coming. And Prophet Musa alayhi salam gets to a point where he literally looks behind him, he sees Fir'aun's people are coming. He looks in front of him, he sees like an ocean, like just a massive ocean in front of him. And you break it down, you tell them, what do you think was going through Prophet Musa's head at that time? Do you think he was scared? Do you think he was worried? And then you tell them that in the Quran, it says, Kalla.
Inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdin.
Exactly. Kalla inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdin. So Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he doesn't hesitate. He says, Allah's with me, he's going to show me the way. He doesn't know necessarily at that point what's going to happen, but he's developed. And it's really beautiful. It's a whole relationship, like a whole journey actually, we can go through in a different time, but that Prophet Musa alayhi salam went through to be able to be at that point where his faith was so strong in Allah and so unshakable. Because there were times before where he had said, I'm scared, inna na nakhaf. And Allah said, don't be scared, right? Whereas at this point, he's at the ocean, he literally says, Allah's with me, he's going to show me a way. And when he had a faith like that, Allah literally split an ocean for him. And it's so powerful to be able to teach ourselves first, and then our kids, that whatever hits you in life, however confused or unsure you are of how things are going to turn out, if I turn to Allah at that moment and I put myself in Prophet Musa alayhi salam's shoes and I'm literally like, Inna ma ya Rabbi sayahdeen, Allah is going to show me a way somehow, I don't know how, but He's going to figure it out for me. It will literally, Allah will split oceans for you. So yeah, I think it's very different from how we were raised. But that's the beauty of the journey, right?
Honestly, all the best answers on this podcast have been from your wife.
Tell me. That's why.
Next time I'll just invite her on.
Yeah,
You can stay at home, look after the kids. But no, that's really beautiful because like you said, I for example, when I think of the stories of the prophets, I take inspiration from them, but I don't put myself in their shoes. And I've realized now more than ever that like we know so much when it comes to our religion because we've sat through it. And I'm not saying that makes us religious. I'm just saying that we know so much because you've listened to countless hours of lectures. You've been to the madrasa. You've taught your own kids and like you've had to learn in that process. So I think often like the changes that we require within are just slight reframing and slight tweaking.
Exactly.
So like you're saying, when you talk about wanting to connect with the Quran, rather than like actively trying to figure it out and shifting and just saying like, Allah help me out here, that's not a huge step to take, but it's like these little tweaks that will just refine the whole process.
It's huge, like to be able, although it doesn't seem like a massive step, that will change everything.
It's massive, yeah, you're right, it's massive.
So for example, even if you look at like the companions of the Prophet at the time of the Prophet, some of his closest companions, like they weren't the most literate, most academically like orientated people, right? But the way that they reached, the level that they reached in terms of their connection with the Quran, it was from a place of like just sincerity and humbleness.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the setup, I agree. Like I think there is an evolution process, and I do also feel that at the time when we were growing up, we didn't have all of these resources. Like over the course of the podcast, we've pulled out like 5 or 6 different resources that literally were just not available once upon a time. So I thought like in ending it would be good to share some of the resources. I can put all the links in the description, but just like if there's anything else that you found of value, even resources online, you mentioned Quran.com for example, and being able to search on there, which I think is like a really easy step that anyone can take. But the question is like for somebody that listens to this podcast and listens to this conversation, it's like, okay, you know what, I'm going to make the effort, I'm going to try and do something. I want to know what the tools are out there, what options are available to people.
I think just before Imranali lists them out, one kind of thing to point out is that the fact that we have so many resources is incredible. It's not what's the word I'm looking for? It's not like a to-do list of something that you feel like is never ending, that you're gonna have to do every single one of these resources. Because sometimes, especially when he lists, like once we go through all of them, it can feel like overwhelming. Like, oh, I knew I wasn't the kind of family that could do this. You know, like where am I going to find the time to do 150 things? But I think the idea is that while he's saying them, if you know which kind of ones work for your family, if you think about it, and then that way you have a kind of list of things at the back of your head, because when your kids will connect or when you'll have time to connect, it's not always planned in advance. Sometimes they'll just be in the mood to connect with the Quran. And if you have a list of resources at the back of your head already, you can just pick from them. So it's more sort of just having a list of things that you know will work when the time shows itself, more than anything else.
I think more than the stuff that we've gone through, for example, these books, Angel Asman, Hasna, the kids, this kind of list of this, I think it's done by For My Iman. She's on Instagram, right? And then you have the flashcards, the Kinder Egg. They have the Kinder Egg. Make sure you buy yourself Kinder Eggs to enjoy and have the positive experience rather than getting beaten up. My Quran study journal is huge. So just as you're playing the Kinder Egg challenge and seeing every day opening a different verse from the Quran and thinking about it, it's important to write things down. As we know, there are all those studies about how much you can gain from the percentages you can gain from just listening to thinking about it, to actually writing about it, to speaking about it as well. The percentages increase the more engaged you are. And this Quran study journal, if you could just I told you we'll empty this shelf. So it's brilliant. as you can see, I've just started my journey with it. The whole idea is whatever verses stand out to you, you go through the meaning.
So does it have the whole Quran?
It literally has the whole Quran in there.
Yeah.
It's made it small so that you have space
to write underneath.
And then every few pages, for example, you'll have verse mapping and reflections and stuff. I'm not an avid journaler, so I don't understand all of this kind of stuff. But all the few notes that I can make, I'll just make it there. So it's just something for me too.
Can I just add one supplementary note on journaling? So I recently came across on the iPhone. Do either of you have an iPhone? Okay, so they have have you seen the journal app?
Yeah, the
new one, right? So I've set a reminder every day at 10 o'clock. I've used it about 3 times in about 2 weeks. But what's really nice is it pulls in, for example, pictures that you've taken, or like if you've gone for a run, it'll pull that, and you can basically like link that and then write about it.
That's cool.
So it's really smart because it intuitively knows, or like if you've gone for a walk, it knows you went for like 6,000 steps. Like, oh, you went for a walk in Harrow. Like, what? Do you want to write about it? But it's really good because it's easy, it's accessible, and like it's obviously secure, but it kind of links into knowing about you. Because sometimes when you think about journaling, it's like, okay, what am I supposed to talk about? What am I supposed to say? Whereas this gives you nice, easy prompts.
Yeah. Where
it's like, I remember I went to the British Museum, so it pulled up a bunch of pictures, and then I just kind of wrote about how the day was.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's only 3 entries in there, but maybe one day we'll get to fill it out. Yeah.
And there are Instagram pages and other, like for example, something about scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something. Yeah. That's the name, right? Something about scripture.
Oh, you thought it was something about scripture.
So she does Quranic journaling, and she gives you ideas. So that you don't have to come up with the ideas yourself. Like you said, if you're not that creative that way or that way inclined, then it just gives you an easy way to be able to connect with your journaling of the Quran.
Exactly. There's also, if you want to learn Arabic, for example, Arabic online, she's phenomenal. I'm
going to start emptying myself now. So I've got one of her books here.
Show off now.
50 Quranic comforts for mums. Yeah.
That's a really good book. It's good because, again, it's relevant. It's stopping this compartmentalization or this separation of, like, I'm a parent, and then, like, I should probably be close to Allah. It kind of combines.
So this one even has, like, prompts after each section, and then you can write down stuff.
Brilliant. I think it's not just for mums though. It's a brilliant read just for everyone.
For parents generally. Yeah. But yeah, so her Arabic course, it allows you to understand, because the majority of the words in the Quran are repeated.
Yeah.
So it allows you to understand the majority of the words within the Quran. So when you're reading in Arabic and you can suddenly understand it, changes the game. Like fully changes the game. And then you can teach that to your kids. So they are like age 10. Imagine if we were reading the Quran at age 10, understanding it. Like the Arabic of it, without having to go to translation, without having to go to some other person's interpretation of what it means, just straight from God reading and being like, this is what I feel like it means to me, changes the game.
Another brilliant thing is Imranali Khaki Bayina Institute. It's just a game changer, the way he looks at the Quran, his knowledge of the Quran, especially the historical aspects of it, and how so there's this whole series, what's it called? Inspired by the Quran, something like that, where he picks on particular verse, his depth in terms of the Arabic language.
Yeah, the grammar, he really goes in deep.
And how he relates and compares 2 of the same words but in different contexts, and just changes everything. And they're like just 3-4 minute videos. So that's really been a huge game changer for me. And there's one app actually that's really helped, Quran Hadi. So sometimes, when you read a verse, you don't really get it first time. So you need to read up about it. But when that's the daunting step, right? Because you feel all these great scholars, they've created multiple volume tafasir of the Quran. But to get it and to try and start reading it is a big thing. So this Quran Hadi app actually makes it very, the whole interface is very, very easy to use, where you can recite it and read the Quran like a Quran, but then if you highlight on the verse, you have options translation and interpretation, and that the tafsir element is nice, easily readable. There's no like thee, thou, they kind of words. It's so much easy to digest as well, and then you can start journaling.
There's one resource you've forgotten, which is your own website. Would you like to tell us more about what you do?
So so the 2 concepts. So livingthequran.co is a website that's been created mainly for families and for parents. So anyone that wants to start this journey, you can go into the website and sign up for these workshops that we'll have together. And my Instagram page, Living the Quran, or I think it's both my name and Living the Quran. And all I do is share different things that I've come across, but also snapshots of different lessons that I've learned or inspirations from the Quran, 1 minute at a time.
Very nice.
Is that a nice?
Good way to end out. No, this has been really interesting, and I thank you for bringing all the props out and demonstrating and getting me to drop an invisible ball. I enjoy watching that one back. But yeah, I think that's everything. Unless there's like any, I mean, I'll turn to Tahira Mahdiyya. Do you have any
I feel so much pressure now.
No, but every time you've spoken, it's just been like
wisdom.
Wisdom, yeah.
I chose correctly.
Any sort of just in closing remarks?
Nothing in specific. I think we have covered everything. I think the main thing is not to put barriers on yourself as an individual, and then also on your kids. We are not like scholars. We're not people who have like this incredible background of having learnt the Quran from when we were 2-3 years old. But we've seen things that are really easy to do, and if you do them consistently, they make a massive difference. We can see it in our kids, we can see it in people we've worked with, we can see it in ourselves. So I think like that's the biggest thing, just not putting any limits on yourself, just coming to Allah with an open heart and being like, okay, start one thing. If it doesn't work, like there's so many entry points, right? So, and your kids' entry points also might be different, and that's fine. You just play with different things. When something works, they say throw 10 things at the wall and one of them will stick. Once something sticks, then just consistently every week or so doing it.
I think that's like I didn't mention it earlier, but that's one thing that's very refreshing here is that you haven't you're not scholars, you're not you haven't. This is just stuff that you've picked up along the way and implemented in your own lives and like working with other people to do. So thank you guys for sharing. I really appreciate it. By the way, I'm traditionally bad at closing out a podcast, so you feel free to jump in any point.
Should we just let him?
Let's see him squirm.
It's awful. I hate it. So, anyways, thank you guys very much for tuning in. That's it for this week. We will be back hopefully within a month, ideally. If you are listening to this for the first time, then please do subscribe and like and follow and all of those good things. I'll put all the links in the description. And
thank you for having us.
Yeah, goodbye.
Bucket list ticked.
Bucket list is ticked. We'll end there.